morning, Sister Diane McGuirt.
Good morning, Jody.
Yeah, with the last name like that, surely you must be from the south side of Chicago.
I am.
Oh, my heavens. You should have a special club, South Side Chicagoans.
See a lot of members.
There's a slew of them.
Right.
So what parish were you connected with as a young child?
I was born on the southeast side, and then when I was a few months old, my parents moved to the southwest side, and we belonged to St. Rita's Parish.
Were you born in Chicago?
Oh, yes.
And your parents were from Chicago also?
Not really.
No?
No. Dad was, Mom was from central Illinois. And anyway, I won't go into the long story, but my grandpa was a coal miner and had traveled with that, and they ended up in Oklahoma. But then, for some reason, they moved to Chicago, and my grandma died there when my mom was 12. She was the youngest of 9. 3 passed away as children. Mm-hmm. So Mom, lived there most of her life. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So did you enter from 8th grade, or did you go to the famous high school the one and only high school in Southside Chicago?
I went through St. Rita's from kindergarten to 8th grade, and then 3 of us made the decision to go to Aquinas. So we spent an hour on the bus going to school and an hour back.
Oh, my.
But Aquinas was wonderful.
You got to be good friends with the other 2, didn't you?
Yes.
Those
yes.
hours.
Very good
Who
friends.
are some of the sisters you remember from Aquinas?
Well, my teachers, Sister Jane Ellen, Sister Grace Loretta, Sister Thomas Mary, Sister Agnes Louise, Sister Dorothy Kappelman, Sister Agnes Rita. I could go on and on.
Well, you must have had a favorite at St. Rita's, too.
I did. My first grade teacher was my favorite, Sister Kitty Scanlon.
Oh.
And
did she help you enter then when the day came? Mm-hmm.
She did, and she was always a very good friend. And if I have time at the end of this interview, I'll kind of go through how, our lives intertwined. And when I came here, when I was so ill in 2012, and she was in the memory unit, when I got better, then I was able to feed her dinner every day.
Oh, how beautiful.
From probably the middle of 2012 until she passed away in January of 2015.
What a
gift. That was such a privilege.
It's like full circle.
Yes.
She was feeding you, and now you were feeding her. How beautiful.
Yes.
Well, what name did you choose, or what name was given to you by Mother Gerald when the time came for receiving a religious name?
Well, one of my choices was Sister Ina Marie, and Ina has been a family name in my mother's family. Her mother's name was Ina. Grandma had a daughter. She had 9 children, but this little girl was named Mary Ina, but she passed away sometime before she was 3. And then when I was born, I was named Helen Diane. Helen after my dad's mom. And then when my sister was born almost 5 years later, they named her Mary Ina.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Did they spell it I-N-A-U-G-H?
No, the Gaelic way. No, they didn't spell it the Gaelic way because Grandma always spelled hers I-N-A.
Well, Mother Gerald must have been very proud that you took that name
after her town,
the town where she
from. Right.
Yes. Were there any other young seniors from Aquinas that entered at the same time?
Actually, 12 of us entered.
Praise God.
Yes, actually 12 entered, Adrian, and then several entered other communities. One to the Daughters of Charity, one to the Mercies, one to the Cincinnatus, a couple to Franciscans. So that was a good percentage of our senior class, that did enter.
Was Fran Lombard one of those women?
Yes, and she remains my best friend.
Oh, how beautiful. Mm-hmm. And who were some of the other sisters?
Janet Trout, Eunice
Yes.
Strasba, Pat Brady. Yeah. There's 6 of us still, Adrian.
Still and be celebrating your 60th anniversary
Yes,
next year,
yes.
correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Next,
So you entered
next
in
June.
1957, and Sister Patrick Jerome was your novice
Yes.
director?
Yes.
And your first mission was where, Diane?
Well, I was in the youngest half of our crowd, and so after we made first profession, the younger ones stayed in and worked on their bachelor's. So that fall, my very first mission was Blessed Sacrament in Toledo. And another sister from my crowd went the same time. There were Sister Thomas Gerard, who's Mary Margaret Menard now, was one of my very good friends in high school, so we lived together there. And it was just, I think there were 16 of us there. There were a lot of us, but it was a great place, and I taught 2nd grade. And then from there, I went to Cincinnati, and I was there for 4 years. And my family always says that it was the Spirit that led them to assign me there, because when Mom and Dad were coming with my sister down to see me, they were going to drive, but then their car broke down.
From Chicago.
Yes, their car broke down, so they took the bus. And my sister and my mom sat together, and my dad went back farther and sat next to a young man who was in the Navy going home from Great Lakes to see his family. And anyway, when you're on a Greyhound traveling a distance, they stop for a meal. So Dad invited him to have lunch, with our family. And little did anybody know, but Dad gave him a piece of paper with our phone number written on it and said, if you ever get lonesome and want a good home-cooked meal, you'd be most welcome, to have it with our family. And the next weekend, his name was Don, called my sister for a date.
And the rest is history?
And the rest is history. They've been married 50 years. They celebrated last December. They have 7 grown children, 17 grandchildren, and the 18th is on the way.
What is your sister's name?
December. My sister's name is Mary Ina.
Mary Ina, right, yes.
Yeah.
And in December, what's happening?
The newest baby is expected to my youngest niece, Katie, and her husband, John.
And do you keep in close contact
Yes,
with him?
and fortunately, other than my time in Minnesota, I've been probably not more than 6 hours away by car. So I usually spend a week at least there in the summer, and then have always, I think, been able to spend Christmas with them for a few days. Yeah, we're very close.
Yeah, well, I won't quiz you on the names of all your nieces and nephews.
I know them, but we don't want to do that right now.
Yes, you mentioned Minnesota. What was your life like in Minnesota, and how did you ever get there?
Well, I taught at 5 different schools in the Chicago area after I left Cincinnati. And one of them was Bishop Quarter. I was there for 3 years before it was closed.
Our military school.
Yes, and that was an experience, but I grew to love it. The boys would be in the dorm and I'd be in my little cubicle, and they'd be playing basketball at night. There was a basketball net outside my room, and every once in a while I have to go in my alcove and fetch the socks so that they could play some more till it was time to go to sleep. But anyway, after Bishop Porter, I went to St. Columbanus, and I was there for 4 years. And they were going to have the 4 of us, 4 sisters who were left there, move out of the convent, to a home, because the community needed a daycare center. And so one of my crowd, Jude Van Balen, who lived with Eunice in southwest Minnesota, called me and said that there was an opening for a religious ed coordinator at a parish out there, and she thought that she thought of me, she said, and she wanted to tell me about it. So she told me a little bit about it, and she gave me the pastor's phone number, and I called, and I went out for an interview. And we didn't interview back then. We got our assignments. And so anyway, I went for an interview, and I did get the position. So
and lived happily ever after there, right?
Yes, it was a wonderful place. There were so many changes. There were so many changes in our religious life and community. And going out there, it was a rural area, lots of corn and beans and hogs, and and
a nice pastor, I hope.
A wonderful pastor, a wonderful pastor, and it was wonderful. I have wonderful memories of my years at Wyndham, and I still, to this day, 44 years after, am friends with Father Roy Latursky, who was the pastor, and with Father Jim Kunz, who was a transitional deacon during that time, but was ordained the following June, and our church choir went from Wyndham to his hometown of Medelia, where he was ordained. And so we've been friends ever since. And also I go back and visit occasionally because, it was like people were so invested in their children. And, you didn't have to, sometimes you have to beg people, to work in the religious ed program and to teach and so on. It wasn't like that in Wyndham.
Lucky you.
I don't remember anybody saying no, when I approached them.
Where did you obtain the confidence to be a religious education director?
Actually, Jody, it was after my religious ed experience at Wyndham, and then I went to Winona and did the same, had the same position. I felt a need to be updated in theology, and so had asked to study in the summer at Aquinas Institute. Now Winona's on the Mississippi River, about 2 miles north of Dubuque, which is on the Mississippi River in Iowa.
So you got on the boat and...
No, I got in my car. So anyway, I was fortunate enough to be able to study there.
That must have given you a lot of confidence, too.
It did, and I loved Aquinas. Yeah, it was wonderful. So after my third summer of going, I was told that I had reached the point where any class that I could take in the summer I had taken, and so I would have to go full-time for a year to be able to complete it, and my degree. And so I think it was Sister Elizabeth Clare who...
Charge of studies.
Yeah, and I contacted her, and so was, given permission to study, so...
Well, that was a happy time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a happy time.
What's one of the memories you have of that full year of study? It
was wonderful. And it was, my degree was a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies. And so much of it was theology, but wonderful classes in counseling and so on. The following summer, I applied for and got a quarter of clinical pastoral education, and that was at Rochester Methodist Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. And it was a wonderful gift that year to me. And also, they have just like classes that you can take for 3 or 4 weeks between semesters. And I was fortunate enough to be given permission to take a class from an Old Testament professor at the Lutheran Seminary, and he and his wife and 15 of us students went to the Holy Land for 3 weeks. And we stayed in Nazareth in a Franciscan hostel for a week and a half, and in the old city of Jerusalem for a week and a half. So
Oh,
it was
my.
wonderful. That was just a wonderful year.
Yeah, so the scriptures came alive, didn't they?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my. Cana.
So-
You were near Cana.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. My very favorite place was the Sea of Galilee. I think I went there a total of 3 times because it was like in my mind, this is untouched, you know.
Yeah.
Jesus was on those waters and
It's-
on that shore.
It's a flow of holy water.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
you certainly were prepared for your ministry for the next 35 years, which is glorious. Please share with our viewers what that ministry was.
Let's see,
Was it Carol
was-
Hoffer that?
Charlotte.
Charlotte
Charlotte
Hofer.
Hofer.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
yes.
I was at a meeting, a cluster meeting at that time. It was before I graduated. I still had to write my paper. And so Charlotte asked me at that cluster meeting, Diane, after your studies, you know, what do you feel called to do? And I said, I really feel called to work with the materially poor. And she just got a big smile on her face and said, it probably was September, and she said, next month, the community is going, when they send out, you know, their bulletin, they're going to send out a letter from Bishop Walter Sullivan, who is inviting 4 of our women to the mountains of Southwest Virginia, a real poverty area, you know, to work with folks. And so the letter came, and I think 11 of us responded to it. 4 of us went in for a January workshop. And they said, don't make up your mind today. Go home, pray about it some more, and let us know. So after that, 4 of us got a letter inviting us to ministry in Southwest Virginia.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was the living situation?
Well, when we went, they wanted us to get a good idea of what the area was like. So we spent a week and a half with sisters in the coal area, a week and a half with the sisters in the farming area. And after that, and after meeting and discerning and praying every night, we felt we were called to the farming area. So then we went back again after those 3 weeks and looked, you know, for a house and for a place and so on. And we were told, Chris Matthews was heading this up, and we were told, we don't want you to go down and start looking for a job. We want you to go down and to get settled in a house, which we were fortunate to find, an old farmhouse in the country, and get to learn the culture, get to know the people, get to know the needs.
How beautiful.
And so we did a lot of volunteering with Meals on Wheels, working with social services, bringing people in from the hollers of the county and so on.
What do you mean by hollers?
Hollers are sections, like oftentimes the hills and mountains will be close together, and it's kind of like a hollow area between them.
Oh.
Yeah, and so it was nothing to go out to bring somebody into social services and to spend an hour to get there and an hour to get back. Mm-hmm. And of course, many of the folks really didn't have a means of transportation. And so through volunteering, Mary Jane started working at Legal Aid. She got training and so on.
Mary Jane
Lubinsky.
Mm-hmm.
And I was volunteering, you know, with a lot of driving, and drove folks who needed to get to mental health appointments. Mm-hmm. And so I got to know the staff at Mental Health. So about a couple of years later, I began to work, you know, like at Mental Health. And again, that was such a blessing in my life.
When you say work with mental health, exactly what does that
Well,
entail?
I worked as a volunteer. You know, in fact, we opened our house to a psychosocial rehabilitation program, and we lived out in the country. You know, so just a half a dozen people or so came. The program grew, and so we had to move, you know, to a bigger place. But At mental health, I was, because of my degree from Aquinas, I was a counselor, I was an advocate. I would go with people when they needed to apply for Medicaid. Some of them could not, work, and so they would need, like to get benefits. That's a very scary thing to have to go before people, and especially if you don't have a lot of confidence. And so I would go with them. I had to go with a handful to court for various reasons.
So you were like an advocate.
I
for
was
them.
an advocate.
Yes.
Yes. And then I worked, as I said, with the psychosocial rehabilitation program twice a week. And
What did that entail?
That was helping people hopefully to be able to learn to live by themselves, to get an apartment, to become independent.
So skills that would help them
Yeah,
along
and
the way.
I often thought of myself as a cheerleader because, they weren't always in the frame of mind that I can do this, and so, but they could, maybe a couple years later, and they were able to move out, like on their own. And also working with people who have illnesses such as schizophrenia, bipolar, serious depression. They had their own set of problems, to deal with. And so I remember a big part of my job was after they got out of the hospital to get them a pill box, show them how to, get their
Pills, day by
correct
day.
pills right. And sometimes I would go to their homes on a weekly basis, to help them to make sure. Just all kinds of little things which in the whole picture make the difference between staying well or, having to go back to the hospital.
Oh my.
Yeah.
You were a Mother Teresa to them.
I don't
truly.
know about that.
Yes,
but,
truly.
yeah.
I mean, you certainly gave your heart and your soul, as well as the other sisters, I'm sure, to the materially poor.
Yes.
But it was life-changing. I mean, you empowered
Yes.
these people, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. And I worked there about 20 years and retired actually almost 30 years, and retired in 2002.
Oh my.
And my mom had a heart attack, and my sister lived in Cincinnati, I lived in Virginia, and there were just the two of us. So both of us invited Mom to come down and live with us. And Mom decided to come, and live with me because she could help me. And that was a wonderful 5 years. But she passed away 5 years later. And so when I got the sabbatical year after I retired, one of my responsibilities was to sell the house. And I was able to do some traveling to family, like in California and Nevada. And that was really good. And then when I got back, I started looking for, another paying position. And one of our sisters told me about an opening as Pastoral Director in the Lexington, Kentucky area. And so I went for an interview and was hired to be Pastoral Director at a parish in Ravenna, Kentucky. And that involved, oh my goodness, that just involved so much.
Too much. Didn't you miss the one-on-one?
Well, I still had one-on-one in the pastoral because deacons, married deacons, or qualified men or women were hired because it's a mission diocese, and one priest might have 2 or 3 parishes. Most counties had one Catholic church, but anyway, so we did all the things in the parish where we were hired to be Pastoral Director, besides saying Mass and sacraments, and so that was a lot of one-on-one education programs, sacramental programs you were responsible for, and because it was a mission area, we didn't just work with Catholics, but we worked with other professionals and other ministers. I belong to the Ministerial Association. I was on the housing board. We had a food pantry, which was in our parish, but eventually moved to a store so that it was more available to people. So,
well, you have had a bird's eye view of the aging process too, haven't you?
Yes.
In the work that you've done. So you have no surprises in your own life, do you?
No, but I am just so happy to be in Adrian.
Yes. You live in Regina.
I live in Regina, and I came here in 2012 because I was very sick and had been in the hospital for almost 3 weeks, most of which was intensive care. So God bless Mary Puniski.
Forever and ever.
She came down and literally helped me physically to get here. And when I came, I was able to see a gastroenterologist in Ann Arbor, and he diagnosed me, and it was a serious diagnosis. And so I spent 4 months in Regina in therapy, getting the best of care, and eventually was able to move over, to Regina.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, when you entered in 1957, did you ever dream then that you would end up in social work?
No, not until I was in studies at Siena, and it was there then that social work entered my mind, and I did make that known. But we were into teaching, and so on. One summer, second summer out, I think, I worked at Catholic Charities in Toledo for a summer. Yeah, but what happened was, it was a good part of the latter part of my active ministry, was social work. So it's like I'm very devoted to praying to the Holy Spirit. And so I just figure the Holy Spirit let it happen.
Father Jim Burke was important in your life, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. One time when I was going through a hard time, and it was the same year as our 15-year renewal, we were making a retreat up in Oxford, Michigan. And I was just sharing with him, the difficult time, yeah. And he quoted Matthew chapter 10 to me. Matthew chapter 10. And Jesus was choosing his disciples and teaching them and telling them that there would be some good times and there would be some very difficult times. And but not to worry about those difficult times, but to pray for the Father to send the Spirit, and the Spirit would speak through them. And that has really guided my whole life since then.
Well,
Yes.
God bless you, and I have no doubt that you were a gift, a picture of love and compassion to all of the people that you met. And I'm so happy to have gotten to know you during these years at Regina. And thank you for today.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this for each of us so that we can share.
Yes.